Started. Thank you all for coming. I'm Andrew Gibson. I'm president of the Online News Association at Mizzou. A few things before we get started. Number one is shout out a few ways you found out about this event. Flyers. Yes?
Email.
Flyer?
From you.
From me? Okay. Forget about me. What else? Email? Friends? Word of mouth? Facebook?
Twitter.
MUinfo, anybody? No? Okay. Well, it's good to hear there are a lot of places. Number two is that on May 1st, we're going to be electing a new executive board. So that is a 5-member team. I'm one of them. 2, 3, 4, 5. President, vice president, secretary, treasurer, social media coordinator. So if you like digital journalism, if you like event planning, you want the chance maybe to go to our national conference, which is very, very cool, definitely consider running. We will have paper applications for you by the end of this meeting, and we'll also have a downloadable one online by the weekend. So look out for that, and we can certainly answer any questions you have afterward about running. And the last thing I'll say about that is that it is a year-long position, but if you're a junior or sophomore and you're studying abroad one of the next 2 semesters, that doesn't mean you can't run. So we can talk to you about that afterward if you're interested. So I'll stop talking now and hand it over to Brad Best, who is the advertising genius in the room and the metrics genius in the room, and we'll let Brad do his thing.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Hi, Brad.
Good to see everybody. Well, I'm glad I'm able to come here and talk to you guys today. Try not to put you to sleep because sometimes when you talk in numbers and analysis, people tend to start dozing off. So I'll try to keep you guys on the edge of your seats. If by nothing else, I'll randomly call on someone just to see if you're paying attention, like I do in my classes. But I want to start off just kind of a little bit of background on myself. I started in advertising. So basically what I used to do, I teach now. So I'm in the StratCom department now, but this was my first year actually in StratCom. I was down in RJI for the last 5 years. Actually, Mike McKean has my old office now, so if you guys don't mind. I was down there listening to the ding of the elevator every so often, right? So, I started off in traditional advertising. So at that point, there really wasn't a whole lot of analysis on anything. It was kind of meet your gross rating points and Nielsen and all this other stuff, right? It wasn't until I got to LiveMercial here that I started having to do some analysis, and a lot of it was done manually because I started at a time when there wasn't a whole lot of analytics platforms that you could just go into and have right there for you, right? So a lot of the measurement, the analysis, everything was manual. It took forever. It's terrible. So you guys yourselves like it a little bit. I worked on a handful of accounts over the years, and really when it got down to meeting George Foreman and selling ShamWows and other types of stuff, is when really the analytics really started playing a key role. And I think I kind of took to it a little, like pretty quickly, and I actually liked it. And I think it was because I was already doing analytics in my fantasy football league, in my fantasy baseball league, in my dorky stuff that I was doing, right? But that got me to look deeper into statistics so I could more accurately predict what was going to happen, and I could act on information that was happening. You know, if a guy all of a sudden starts to walk a bunch of people, you know, that's not good if you have that pitcher on your baseball team, right? For any of you who like baseball. You could look at trends and things like that, right? Well, the same principles really apply to any kind of website, right? Whether it be e-commerce or content websites, which is, I'm guessing, what most of you in here are interested in learning about, so I'll try to limit my e-commerce stuff. But really, every website needs to understand what people are doing on their website, how people are getting there, if they're coming back, those types of things, right? So let's roll right into that. First question you always have to ask yourself, no matter what kind of entity you are, is why does your website exist? What's the purpose of it? And a lot of people don't do that. They say, oh, I have a business, or I have this, and I guess I need a website because people are on the internet, right? At least I think the internet's going to catch on. We're still debating that, right? Why does your website exist? Well, the first thing you need to ask, or the first thing you need to do, is get qualified people to your site, right? You want people to your site, right? If you are ESPN.com, You know, do you want people who are interested in knitting mittens for their kitten on your site? No, right? So ESPN is going after people interested in sports, right? So they have sports content, right? So sometimes it seems pretty simplistic, but you really got to step back sometimes and ask yourself, why does your website exist, right? If you're a news website, why does your website exist? And you can think about that. I'm going to ask it in more detail in a second, but think about that for a second, right? What really are you trying to do with your website? And I'm guessing it's similar to why you have a newspaper, right? So, but the second step, you want to get them to take the desired action that you want them to take, right? So, on a website, on a news website, it might go deeper than just we want people to read a story. Okay, which story? How many stories? Right? How many pages do we want them to go to? What do we present to them? Right? So you got to think of it in those terms. And the third step is you want to get them to come back. Right? You don't just want them to come once, especially if you're a news organization. You probably want return visitors, right? Everybody talks about unique visitors and that, and I'll get to that in a second. But getting people to return is essential, right, to the longevity of your website. So you have to ask yourself, did you meet or exceed expectations of the person coming to your site? If they came to your site for a specific story, did it meet their goals, right? Did it meet their expectations? Or did they start clicking around your site because they can't find what they want, right? So we got to think about things in those ways. So let's go back here for a second and really think about who the first news analyst was, right? If you think about the old paper boy standing on the corner somewhere, you know, did he just randomly go somewhere and say, I'm going to sell papers today. I'm going to go to my mom's backyard and sell papers in the backyard. Where did he go?
Busy street corners.
Why?
Busy, because that's where the most foot traffic is.
Okay, right? So he was doing some analysis to make some money, right? Well, we got to apply those principles in a digital environment now, right? We can't just sit back and not know what's happening with our site. And worse yet, even if we know something, we got to act on it, right? And that's a lot of times where organizations can have some trouble because they're like, well, we got to maximize our money now. We can't wait 2 weeks to maximize our stuff, right? So we got to optimize our stuff right now, right? But you know, we got to think about things like the paperboy thought about it back then, right? Because it's about you have to make money in order to pay people, right? So you always have to think about how does revenue tie into what you're doing journalistically, right? If you do something on your website and you optimize it, now you're making $100,000 more this year than you did last year. Wow, now I can put more reporters on the street. We can cover things more deeply, right? And in a lot of instances, especially with websites that get a lot of traffic, which I'll cover here in a second, those two things can go hand in hand, right? So you create even a more engaged citizenry, right? Because you make more money, right? So hopefully it works that way. It doesn't always in the business of journalism, or in any business, right? It doesn't always flow that way, but certainly it can. So let's define web analytics here, just so everybody kind of knows, has kind of a base understanding of it. If you haven't, going to do it. Actually, let me step back for a second and ask, who in here has actually gone into Google Analytics or used Omniture or something like that? Okay, so there's a few of you who haven't had that opportunity yet. Hopefully then we can kind of bring everybody up to speed on what it is and some of the processes. So this is a process of collecting, measuring, and analyzing user activity with an ad and or website. It's used to understand and help achieve the intended objective of an ad and or website. Because this can certainly analytics certainly plays into digital advertising, but it also plays into content on your website, right? So there are and they a lot of times play hand in hand because you're doing advertising to bring people in a way to your website, right? So you need to really understand how that works. So let's do some digital definitions here. What is an impression? Yeah.
So so if you're on a website and you just see the ad, that is one impression.
Right, so the page loads, right? Pixel fires, that's an impression, right? Is that the same as a page view?
Don't know.
You said no, why?
Because you could have multiple ads on one page, 4 impressions.
Okay.
But you don't have across ads, so that one ad will only have 1 impression.
Right. So it's kind of a one-to-one, right? So we can kind of think of it in those terms, I think a little bit. It isn't the exact same, but it's real close. So, and some of the questions I ask here are because people use different terminology for different things, and we want to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same. Have you ever heard anybody say, how many hits did your website get today? Anybody ever hear that? Yeah. What do they mean by a hit?
Usually, I mean, some people would be confused and think it's just a page views.
Okay, is a hit a page view? Or is it a visit? Or is it a visitor? Those are different things, right? So an impression just happens, right? Anytime a page loads, that's an impression, right? That's just a generic impression. That's a page view in advertising sense because obviously, and again, well, I don't want to skip it, but what is a CPM? It's cost per thousand. The M is the Roman numeral. It confused me for years. But it is a cost per thousand. So for every 1,000 impressions, a publisher can charge an advertiser X amount of dollars, right? That means a lot because the more impressions that you get, the more money you can make, right? So sometimes you'll find entities going after as many page views as they can find, right? But not all page views were created equal, right? Sometimes people are going through a bunch of slideshows, which is on a page, just to see the picture of themselves or somebody they know, right, on there. So that isn't an engaged person doing that. So there's different measurements that we can do, but in advertising purposes, that's how just about all websites are charging and making money is through advertising charged on a cost per thousand basis. So the Missourian charges one of their advertisers, Joe Mockins or whatever, right? They'll charge Joe Mockins a CPM, $10. Maybe it's $10, maybe it's $20. I don't know exactly what they charge it. It kind of goes back and forth depending on how much traffic they get and stuff. But for instance, we're going to say it's $10, right? So every 1,000 people or every 1,000 times a page loads and Joe Mockins' ad is shown, the Missourian makes $10, okay? And again, maybe 15 or 20, I don't know. But that's how they make money, right? One of the ways they make money, at least in the advertising sense. But if you're an advertiser and you're Joe Mockins and your ad is way at the bottom of the page, what does it mean to be above the fold versus below the fold in an advertising sense, in digital advertising sense, yeah?
The content that displays before you have to scroll down.
Down or across, depending on how a website's up. Right, absolutely, right? So if your ad is at the bottom of the page and nobody scrolls down there, the advertiser's still charged because the page loaded, right? So certainly publishers need to work with advertisers on that front to make sure that the advertising is effective, right? If the advertising is not effective, they're not going to come back to the site, and the sales departments, have some issues there. But what a lot of advertisers are interested in is unique impressions. And what is a unique impression? Try to give somebody else a chance here. A unique impression.
Maybe if a person actually clicks on the thing.
All right, actually, that's a slightly different metric, which I'm going to get to in a second. But unique impression, anybody? All right, we'll go back here.
So if you have like 1,000 visits and 400 unique visits, that means that 400 individuals came to your website 1,000 times. So it's each individual cookie or so that comes through.
Kind of.
So,
It's not an exact measure of reach, which I'm going to ask about in a second, but which is the next question, right? But a unique impression is always measured over a given period of time, right? And so if you went to the Missourian this morning, right, you would be, if that's the first time you did it in the course of a month, you're a unique impression. If you go back tomorrow, you are no longer a unique impression, as long as you didn't clear your cookies and all that stuff. So unique impression is the first time that a visitor goes to a website over a given period of time. That can be measured over a day, or a week, or a month, or a year. Typically it's measured over a month, right? So you've got monthly unique impressions, okay? It's really important for advertisers, unique impressions, but if you're a news website, you actually want to kind of see who's loyal to your site and who you really should be creating stories for, and that should be a loyal audience, and you would hope that your loyal audience would come back more than once a month, right? So from that perspective, you want to look at return visitors, right, instead of unique visitors, right? But if you're an advertiser, you may want to reach as many people as possible, right? But a unique impression isn't exactly a measure of reach because, I'm sorry, what was your name that answered?
Oh, Emily.
Emily? So Emily, you went to the Missourian website today, and then, what's your name?
Karen.
Karen? Maybe you went on Emily's computer and went to the Missourian website. Well, you're no longer, or that might be, you're a unique person, but you haven't been measured that way, right? Because she used your computer and they store that information from your IP address, and you're no longer a unique impression, right? But you are a unique person, right? So people share computers, that can kind of throw some of these numbers off. Or what if you clear your cookies and come back? You're a unique impression again, right? So these numbers can be skewed a little bit. Typically, you're only looking at about a 10% difference in reality from that happening. But depending on every website's different, so you kind of just have to know your own website. But so it's not a true measure of reach, but people often talk in those terms that a unique impression is how many people you've reached. Kind of, right? I don't want to confuse anybody, but it's kind of that way. So let's get to the visitor question. What is a visitor to a website?
It's pretty much exactly what you'd think it would be. Just somebody who comes to a website and they can do whatever they want. Doesn't matter how many pages or anything like that they view, they're still a single visitor.
Yeah, and so we can talk in terms of a unique visitor versus a return visitor, right? But that is different than a visit, right? Anybody know how visits are calculated on the website? So a visit, you could call a session, right? Somebody goes to a website, that is a visit, right? And then you could, depending on how many pages they go to and things, and we could say, well, how long were they there? So what was the average visit duration, right? But here's the kicker. Your name is Karen? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you go to a website, say you're at the Missourian website, and you're cruising around, you've gone to a couple of pages, and you get up, you go to lunch, and you come back 35 minutes later. That's a second visit, okay? Because after 30 minutes of inactivity, these web property or web analytics companies will count you as a new visit. Does that make sense? Everybody, yeah? So that's kind of how visits are measured. So is a visit a hit? Yeah.
So does that mean if I go to lunch and I sign off of that page, or does it measure the pages? Like I leave Facebook up all day long. Am I just one visitor for that whole day?
As far as a visit goes, no. So you can go to, say, the Missourian website. You can get off the website, maybe follow a link to, ESPN, and then you come back to the Missourian. If you come back within a half an hour, that's not a new visit. But if you come back 31 minutes later, you are a new visit.
If I stay on for an hour, 3
If
hours.
there's activity of any sort on the website, that's just one continuous visit.
And is that 30 minutes now an industry standard?
Yeah. But in a lot of the paid analytics stuff, you can set your own. So if you don't think that, like maybe you have a website that has a lot of video on it, long form video, that's like 45 minutes. Well, if you're just sitting watching a video and nothing's happening, and you just hit it, well, you might want to set yours at 45 minutes if you have 45-minute type videos on your site. So you can adjust that on your own, but it goes into the manual settings. And a lot of times the basic programs, some of the free ones won't let you do that. You have to do the premium ones in order to have that option. Although I haven't looked into, say, like the Google one recently, but that's the way it used to be anyway. I know the premium one you can set your own. So does that make sense for everybody, kind of how that's measured? So a lot of times people will refer to a visit as a hit. right? Got hit to my website today. Well, maybe it's 50 visits, right? Because it might have been the same person coming back, right? So it's a visit, okay? It's a session, okay? Google, if you go into any Google training, you will see that referred to as a session, okay? So depending on your analytics program, there could be similar terminology for the same thing, okay? What about bounce rate? What do you think bounce rate might be?
That's when somebody loads a page and they quick just leave or exit out of that page.
So they've only gone to one page, they haven't taken any action on the page, because a lot of analytics programs now, if you can do something within the page, like maybe you're a mortgage company, right? And you have a mortgage calculator on that page, and somebody puts in, trying to calculate a mortgage for themselves, right? And then leaves after that one page, that is not a bounce, because they've taken an action on that page. Does that make sense? Okay, so sometimes this is measured a little bit different, but typically you're looking at somebody who's been to one page and then left, right? They didn't go any deeper with it into the website, okay? Now, this affects visit duration because analytics programs need you to go to a second page in order to measure how long you've been on that site. So it's the way that they measure stuff. So a high bounce rate will mean a low average visit duration. And it's kind of artificially low, right? Because somebody may go to one page and read every story on the page. So you go to some websites and there's story after story after story all on one page, right? You're not, in an advertising sense, getting credit for the engagement that's happening on that page. That's why a lot of times they'll break up a story and send you to a second page if you're halfway through, right? That's kind of why that's important. So a high bounce rate is bad. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't pay attention to this, right? It's something that you really need to look after. If you have a high bounce rate, that means either your content is not engaging or you're not giving them something else to look at that's related to the content, maybe semantically related to your content, meaning that if you go to a Kansas City Royals story, maybe there's another Royals story that they present to you underneath that or in close proximity that would get you to go to a second page, right? But if you're not giving your consumer related content, you're failing them, right? And so you have to think about that in how you present and how you design your web page, because you always want people to stay on your website and become more informed, right? Because that might be your what you're trying to do as a business goal, right? Now, what is a CPL? Anybody ever familiar with that? That's more of an advertising thing, but that's a cost per lead, right? We talked about a cost per thousand, that's impressions. But any publisher can charge on a CPL or a CPA basis or CPW basis, but we'll start with CPL, the cost per lead. If you're a lawyer, right, and you need leads in order to go out and get people to be your client, right, you might not give two craps about how many impressions you've gotten or how many clicks you've gotten. What you care about is how many potential clients you might have by somebody filling out a lead form, right? Well, there's a lot of websites out there that charge on this basis. So they don't charge people on a cost per thousand basis. They'll say, hey, I'm going to generate leads for you, and every time I generate a lead from you, you pay me $5 or $10. Well, if you have a niche website, like maybe you're doing business writing, or maybe you're doing financial writing or something, every time you can generate a lead for a business, sometimes that pays better than on a cost per thousand basis, right? Maybe you only have to show 500 ads in order to get to that $10, right? Maybe you get $10 a lead. Maybe you got 2 leads showing only 500 impressions, right? And now the Missourian would make $20 instead of $10, and half the impressions, right? We can test those things, right? We can see if that works. A CPA is just a cost per action. That's a generic term, right? A lead is an action. A click is an action. A hotel booking is an action, right? A sign up for Netflix is an action, right? So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just talk in terms of CPWs, cost per whatever, right? Because in your cost per whatever, it kind of includes everything in a big bucket, right? Depending on somebody's business, they may call it something different. Maybe a cost per sale or whatever, right? So cost per whatever, right? So those are things that you have to kind of think about, especially in on a publisher side, you need to know what's going to make you the most money, right? There's people making millions and millions of dollars doing nothing but lead generation type ads on their website. They don't even bother charging on the cost per thousand basis, which is an industry standard right now, right? But oh gosh, this is probably it's right before I came here. So this was in 2006. I was working with the ABC station in Atlanta about potentially setting up some ads based off of the cost per whatever model, right? Because they were complaining that, wow, our CPMs are low. Well, why? If your ads are working and your client's ads are working, maybe you should go after those kind of advertisers and say, hey, we're going to just put you on our site. You don't have to pay us anything unless we get you a lead or an action, right? It ended up, we did a lot of work on it. We designed a page. We had everything set up for them and how it would work, and management nixed it, so we didn't get to test it. I can't tell you guys right now if that would work on a general news site, or if you would have to be there. You'd have to test it to find out, right? But it's really all about what makes you the most money, right? But I can tell you right now that there's affiliate marketers out there sitting on a beach somewhere, sipping a Mai Tai with his laptop open, right, making millions of dollars on a cost per lead basis, right? So you always want to keep an open mind with what could potentially work, okay? So let's look at measurement here, for example. We would say, can we just assume that people come to our site and buy stuff or read stories, right? This is the whole idea of why we measure stuff, right? We want to know what's happening, right? We can't just assume stuff, right? Unfortunately, a lot of decisions are made that way. Well, I don't think people will like that. Well, did you test it? No, that's my hunch. What? So these conversations happen on the publisher side all the time. Whether it be a e-commerce publisher or a news publisher, you can't be closed-minded about testing things, right? It doesn't take a lot to test, right? But one thing you really need to understand is, are we meeting our audience's expectations? So are we, in a news sense, are we covering what our audience cares about? Right? And in a way that engages them. Right? And we can measure those things, right? We can actually survey people if we want, right, and ask them. Now that I want to caveat that with, you shouldn't just put up a bunch of Britney Spears information because people are engaged with that. That's not what a typical news organization is about. There has to be hard news, right? But that's certainly a decision that needs to be made in the newsroom. But certainly, if your local audience really cares about a certain story, do you just write one? Do you write several? How do you cover it, right? You got to keep asking those things, right? And you need to look at your analytics to see what stories lead to more stories being read, right? So maybe a Michael Sam story, might lead to somebody consuming 2 or 3 additional stories, right? Well, that Michael Sam story should be a lead. That should be on the homepage. That should be, one of the starting points for people, because if they're engaged in that story, that may lead them to other additional pages, right? That's good in the sense of both advertising revenue and for having a more engaged citizenry, right? Which is, in a lot of senses, is why news organizations exist, right? But you can actually measure content velocity, right? What kind of content engages people to the point where they're more engaged with the site, right? Another thing that I'm finding, I've been involved now with working with a number of different news organizations in looking at their analytics. And one thing I'm always just shocked is they don't enable, or they don't measure internal search terms on their website, which is shocking. I mean, it's pretty much every large organization will do that. But I'm talking Palm Beach Post, Worcester Telegram and Gazette, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, KSHB in Kansas City. They're not looking at their internal search terms. But what if somebody is searching for the same term? And a lot of people are searching for the same term. And you find that thousands of people have searched for a term what do either you're not presenting that information to them, or, there's an issue there, but you've got to know what's happening on your website, right? So if I can say anything to make sure whatever news organization you go to work for is measuring internal search terms, okay? It boggles my mind that doesn't happen more often. But it's very important to know what people are looking for on your website. Now, do you think Amazon would measure their internal search terms? Yeah? Yeah, they probably want to know, right? Right. So, but why wouldn't a news organization want to know that? Well, in a lot of instances, they don't realize how they could use that to their advantage, right? So sometimes it's just bringing that knowledge to them. They're kind of, oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to enable that. I'm going to talk to my web guy, and it's really easy. Go into Webmaster Tools and Google if that's your thing, or you can set up the Site Catalyst. There's a number of different ways. Some people just put in a generic search bar, like Yahoo gives away a free one that you can a widget you can put into your website, but then you can't measure through your analytics program who's searching for what, right? So don't do that. Sometimes it pays to do it the right way. You want to know how your audience is consuming news, right? And one thing you can look at is pathing reports online, right? So you want to figure out what is the path. Now, in e-commerce sense, of course that makes sense, right? You want to know, does somebody search Nike, and then shoes, and then size, and then color, right? You can look at a path to purchase, right? But is there a path that you want your consumer, or that you want your consumer of news to take on your website, right? Maybe there is, right? Maybe you're running an internal campaign to try to drive subscriptions on the print side, right? Well, when somebody clicked the link to go to that 50% off this month or whatever it is, right? You want to be able to follow their path to conversion, right? Then you want to see where people are dropping out in that path to see why are they dropping out on this page or off of this page, right? So you want to keep your eye on a path report. Now, in a news site, sometimes you may say, well, I want people to consume whatever they want, right? Maybe they start at news and they go to sports, and they go to entertainment, and then weather, whatever, right? So, but you can look back up to that content velocity to see which pages are promoting more, right? You might want to present that first, and then you can change their path that they're taking, right? Without them even knowing, right? But yet, it's good for you, it's good for them, and everybody wins, right? So, you definitely need to know where your audience is coming from, right? God, when I first got here, I was talking to one of the salespeople at the Missouri, and he's not here anymore. I think he left to be a ski instructor, actually. I was asking. He said, "Well, one thing we found that we don't want to tell many people about is that half the visits that come to our site are from out of market." I'm like, what? So I looked into it, and he was right. Half the visits that go to the Missourian were from out of market. But guess what? 85% of the page views that happened on the Missourian's website were local, right? So there was a lot of people that just came in and then left. They bounced, right, the out of market people. But that's not your core audience, right? You're not creating stories for those people that are in New York or in Montreal or in Poland or wherever they're coming from, right? You're creating stories for people in the local market, right? So you really have to dig a little bit deeper sometimes and not just take the first glance and really think about what these terms mean to understand exactly who your audience is, right? So it's definitely important to know where people are coming from. Again, you want to look at who is consuming news online and on mobile, right? There may be different audiences with desktop and mobile, and I can almost bet you that there are, right? Typically, mobile skews younger, although that's not it's not as big of a deal as it was in just the last couple of years, because even my mom and dad have smartphones now, and they're not at all technical. So, but you need to know what news they're consuming, what stories they're consuming, right? Is mobile different than desktop? Maybe you're on your mobile phone and you're not going as deep into web pages, right? Smaller screen, right? You might want to sit and read a longer story on your desktop. There could be differences, but we don't know unless we measure and look at that, right? So you definitely need to keep an eye on mobile and desktop. You also need to look at your mobile reports to know how fast is your mobile audience growing, right? Every market's going to be different. Every news organization is going to be different. But if you have a mobile audience that is growing rapidly, you need to make sure that the mobile experience is good for them, right? Otherwise, you're going to lose them and possibly forever. They'll go to your competition, right? So you don't want to give them that other option. You got to meet their expectations or exceed them, ideally, right? You know, you might want to know how your website is rendering on all browsers. You know, I've had several students over the past few years looking at these news websites, and they'll say, oh, everything looks good. You know, I checked Chrome, Firefox, Safari, everything's good. So we ran the report and found that 75% of the site's traffic is coming from Internet Explorer, which, because we all have Apples here at school, we're checking on, right? Well, that's often the #1 way that people are getting to news websites, especially because a lot of times the core audience of a news website isn't 18 to 24, right? It's like 35 to 54, right? And those people aren't on Macs, right? They're on PCs, okay? And they're using Internet Explorer, right? Ask your parents, what browser do they use? Some may be using Chrome, but I bet you a lot of them are using Internet Explorer. My mom and dad do. Yeah, they're in their early 60s. You know, but they certainly you'll want to know that, because we did a thing with Star Tribune in Minneapolis, and one of the first things we found was that a lot of their stories weren't rendering in Chrome. And they were just showing up as white space, right? So immediately, like in the middle of our presentation, our client got on the phone. He's like, "Hey, we need to fix this now." You know, you're losing how many people to those that might have clicked on those stories. Not to mention how many people won't come back to that site because it didn't look right. It didn't meet expectations. Remember, get people there, hold them there to do what you want them to do, and get them to come back. If you don't meet expectations, are they going to come back? Right? So you got to think about it those times. Let's see what else we've got. This is one of the most important things I can tell you guys here today. User experience is king. It has been for years, right? How you experience, your personal experience on a website is super important, right? If you don't like a website, are you going back? No, right? And so if you have people that are one and dones, never come back, that's a bad thing, right? But if you can exceed expectations, and user experience is a big part of that expectation metric, then you're going to be all right. So how are we going to measure engagement on a site? How do we know if people are engaging on a site? And here's some reports that you can run that can tell you a little bit about that. We talked about average time on site, right? So how long did that visit or did that session last, right? Are people on our news website for 30 seconds? That's bad, right? What can they consume in 30 seconds, right? You may want to look for, and you can use it your own personal website or your own news site as a starting point. So you don't have to say, oh, what did the industry do? Where do I stack up against some other place? Look at what's happening on your site. If your average time on site is 2 minutes and 30 seconds, try to achieve 2 minutes and 45 seconds. What can we do to make that happen, right? So that you can start thinking of it in those terms. Bounce rate. Again, lowering this equals increased time on site, right? So if you can keep people on the site to take more actions, you'll lower your bounce rate and you'll increase that average time on site. You want to look at page views per visit. So how many pages did happen within a given visit, right? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Right? And you can use that as a starting point to try to increase, right? That's how you can set up a goal, right? To test it. Recency. When was the last visit? Right? Did it happen yesterday? 2 days ago? 10 days ago? A month ago? Right? Recency certainly is important when you're talking about a general news site, right? You want people there, especially your loyal audience, daily, if not multiple times in a day, right? So we want to look at return frequency. That's how often do they come back. You can look at return versus unique visits, right? And again, from a news organization's perspective, is our return visits important to you? and how are unique visits important to you, okay? So you got to think on both sides of that. Server-side data. But when people, I've heard people over the years complain, oh, you know, your that analytics data isn't all that accurate, and you know, it's got problems. You know, I use the same computer as my wife, and you know, they're gonna treat us as the same person, and I'm seeing makeup ads on the site. Well, you know, it isn't 100% accurate. But you know what? I bet if you sat and looked over that person's shoulder, that 95% of the time it's going to be on, right? So we need to understand how this compares to other mediums, right? How does this accuracy compare to TV, right? How does it compare to print, right? It wasn't that long ago I read an article about USA Today's circulation, and they count every paper they drop at a hotel, read or unread. That's part of their circulation, right? How accurate is that? Nielsen. If anybody wants to know what say The Voice is rated in Colombia, anybody watch The Voice? No, but it's one of the highest rated shows on TV. Why? Because you fill out a diary, right? So maybe you like the show, but maybe you haven't watched it in 2 weeks, right? But you're still going to fill out that diary for Nielsen and say, yeah, I watched that show. It's skewed data, and their methodologies are not good. Yet we base billions of dollars of advertising money off of their numbers, right? Nielsen's going to tell you that, oh no, we count that, we take that into consideration. Here's the other part. Have any of you ever been a Nielsen person? Anybody ever fill out a survey for Nielsen? You have? Okay, we got one in here, right? You have? Okay, all right, people are, yeah, okay. It would shock you to know that 90% of the diaries that are filled out in the Columbia Jefferson City market are by people over the age of 50. So how does that work if your favorite show is South Park? Do 50-year-olds watch South Park? Probably not, but you know what? We got 30,000 students here who might be watching it, right? So, you know, you really got to question how accurate that is, right? So, and what about outdoor? You got a guy sitting out there with a clicker of how many cars go by. You know, well, what if it's a slow day? You know, I mean, there's problems with all of these things. Radio's the same way. Arbitron is kind of the Nielsen of, and I think Nielsen's either bought Arbitron, or I don't know how they get away with the whole monopoly thing, but I'm not a legal guy, so I couldn't tell you. But radio's the same way. Sample stuff, you don't want to know that, right? You may have your radio on in your room and you go out the door, right? But you're just going to report on the stations that you like, right? You're not going to say you listen to a country station if you like hip hop, right? So there are definitely issues with those. Plus, there's a lot of sample data going on, right? Whereas on the server-side data that we get, that's everybody that came to the site, right? So we'll know if 10 million people came to our website a given month, right? It may be 5-10% skewed because of the issues that we talked about earlier, but it's still pretty accurate, right? So don't let anybody tell you that the data is not accurate. Now, if you run Google Analytics and Adobe Site Catalyst on your site, you're not going to get exact numbers, right? Pixels fire in different ways. Sometimes they misfire, things like that. So you're never going to have exactly the same numbers, right? But they're going to be pretty close, right? Within reason. It's going to be a reasonable amount, typically. If not, then you know maybe the Adobe code or the Google code is broken on your site, right? And advertisers and publishers, a lot of times will use a third party, somebody like Google's DoubleClick or Microsoft's Atlas, to measure numbers with advertising and actual publisher numbers. And then they'll just say that, hey, whatever they come up with is what we use, even though it's going to be different than your Google Analytics numbers or your Site Catalyst numbers. Does that make sense? Everybody just want to make sure that it's not always perfectly accurate. All right. But one of the biggest things we can possibly do here is test, right? We can run multivariate tests, we can run A/B tests. So maybe you guys both work on a story together, right? And you have one headline you want to use, and you have one headline you want to use. You can use both, and you can see what people are more engaged with, right? You can see, okay, what was the bounce rate for yours? What was the average time on site for yours versus yours? Well, you know, how many page views per visit happened because somebody came in from your article and then went on to other pages, right? We can look at all these things. We can look at these reports, right, and see what happened, right? So we can test headlines. That's definitely one thing we can test. You can test how you cover a story. If you want, you can have the same story and you can cover it one way and you can cover it another way and see what people engage with more, right? And then that may be a learning lesson of how you cover things in the future, right? Maybe you do one more visually, one more contextually, and you might find that, and this is another little pet peeve of mine, is a lot of times news websites are free. You just go on and do whatever you want, right? Why not at least ask people to register? If you want to give them the news, fine, but let people register. Then you can start targeting those people, right? So then we might know who wants something more visually and who wants something more textually, right? And their things, and you can serve them what they want, right? And we can certainly look at these things over time, but we don't know unless we look at that. Yeah.
So, for example, like testing out different headlines for the same story to see which one drives more engagement. How would you go about doing that? How would you split up your samples? Would you just say half the visitors will see this?
You can send, well, maybe you've been doing it one way for a long time, you know? You can send 95% of your traffic to the way you've always been doing it, and just use 5% of the traffic to come to that story to look at it a different way, right? And then you can see whatever your metric or goal that you set up for that, or however you're measuring it as a success failure, you can look at which way was better. If you notice that the 5% is kicking the butt of the old way, right? Then you can start sending more and more of your traffic to the new way. And now you know you've got a winner, right? And let's not cover it, let's not use this type of headline anymore, right? And maybe you can start to organize the types of headlines. We did this with this headline, or we did this with this headline. You can categorize those to see what happens over time, right? But it takes a little bit of organization too to do that, to really have kind of a long-term measurable success rate where we know over the past 5 years that if we cover a story in this way, or if we do this kind of headline, that this is going to work better than this, right? But it certainly isn't it's helpful to be organized in that way, and you can just categorize those things, okay? The difference between A/B and multivariate testing is like headline A versus headline B. Multivariate testing might be, we're going to test this headline with the video content, and this headline with the textual stuff, and you can test multiple elements on the same page at the same time using a multivariate test. I'm not smart enough to do it. You need like a PhD level person to do that, but you can do that. So you don't have to just test a headline at one time, but you do need somebody pretty smart to set up a multivariate test because it's much more complex. Anybody in this room could do an A/B test right now, right? So that's something to think about. First things first, again, we need to talk about what our business objectives are. So back to why does your site exist, right? And after you figure out your business objective, again, this might be, we want a more informed citizenry, right? Your business objective might be, we want to sell as many shoes as we can today, right, for an e-commerce site, right? So you're going to have a business objective that you start with. The next thing, you're going to say, what goals should we set up, or should we set to help us achieve our objective above? So what goals, or what should we measure to see if we're a success or not with our first business objectives, right? So again, what do we measure to achieve the goals we set up there? And what are our key performance indicators? And that's what they are called in the industry, key performance indicators, or KPIs. So anytime you hear of a KPI is measuring a goal of some sort, right? So you set a goal, maybe it's, we want everybody going to 3 pages for every visit, right? So that's your goal. So you want to set up, your metric then needs to be page views per visit, right? And then you can see if you're hitting that goal or not, right? And again, we need to look at stakeholders. So who in the organization needs to be concerned with analytics? If anybody in here has seen anything about it, you say, well, we're swimming in data. You know, there's like a data fire hose going on, and everybody's swimming in this data, but nobody's making sense of anything, right? So if you're an analytics person, you need to know how often do people need to get reports, which metrics that person needs to know about. If you are, if you're the tech person, you're in charge of the technical aspect of your website, do you want to know if people are getting a 404 error when they're trying to go to a story? Yeah, But does the publisher need to know that? Does he need to know it every day? No, he never needs to know it, right? But damn sure that the tech guy needs to know it like immediately, right? And you can actually do, in Google Analytics, you can actually go to Webmaster Tools and you can run tests for your site every day or every so often. You can do multiple times a day to see if the 404 errors are popping up, and then you can fix those, right? Again, if you have different editors that are in charge of different aspects of your website, maybe you have a sports editor or a news editor or City Hall, whatever, those people will probably need to get the section reports and to see how their section is stacking up. Maybe it's daily, maybe it's just weekly. Maybe they don't have time to look at it every single day, but maybe they want to compare week over week or month over month, or the month of April this year to the month of April last year, right? So you can look at these different reports, and different people in your organization are going to be concerned with different types of metrics and different types of reports. You need to give those to them in the right time, and give them what they need to know, not everything, right? And a lot of times that's what I've seen in news organizations. Everybody's getting everything, so nobody looks at anything, right? So that can be, it's what do they call it, analysis, or paralysis by analysis, right? So you definitely want to avoid that thing. One of the big things you can do is find a champion for your cause, right? If you know that changes need to be made on the website, you need to find the person in your organization who can take you under their arm and say, okay, here we're going to make these changes, and I'm going to tell this person they got to do it or they're fired, right? Because a lot of times you're going to the tech guy and be like, hey, this headline works a lot better, and the tech guy is going to be like, so what do I care? Just something else I got to do. So if they don't have anybody directing them to do that, they're not going to make the change, right? What incentive do they have, right? Certainly you got to have somebody in management be a champion for your cause, right? So again, you want to try to tie revenue back in your reports. Otherwise, why would your boss okay that? So if you do find a champion, you got to say, hey, if we tried this, I think we could have a 25% increase in revenue on this page. How much money is that? Oh, it could be about $600 a month. Okay, let's do it, right? But if you don't tie revenue back to anything, why are they going to okay a time-consuming project? Right? It's just not going to happen. Again, which model should you use? Why should you care? Oh, shoot, I meant to move that. Sorry. So I'll bring that back. But we're going to tie this into this bullet point here. Again, you need to take a look at your analytics reports to know which model you should be using, right? Should we be charging on a CPM? Should we be charging on a flat rate, on a CPA, on a CPC, cost per click, right? Cost per action. Flat rate is $30 a month no matter how much traffic we get. No matter how many impressions are happening on our website this month, we're charging $30. We might get 2 impressions. We might get 10 million. We don't know, but we're charging a flat rate, right? So you need to understand kind of the financial sense. If everybody wants to know a little bit more about how to calculate that out, I will get that to you. I think I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'll try to go real quickly. But again, this is the process of analytics, and it's a constant learning process, right? Notice it's not linear. It keeps going round and round, right? Because you always got to keep testing, right? So you define your goals, you build your KPIs, you collect the data, you do your data analysis, you test alternatives, test, and then you implement the winner, right? And then you go back to defining your goal, and you build another KPI if you need to, right? And you keep this process going. It never ends, right? So let's take a look here of how some people do it. You've got the old set it, forget it versus the, be honest. So has anybody ever seen that? I want to try to get to that one here, and let's go to. So is your website like cooking chicken?
This chicken over, this chicken over, and this chicken over, 10. I'll just walk over here. I'll put it in this new Pro model. I'll slide it back. If you followed all the instructional material, you just...
Have you ever seen this? It's a bit older. Some of you guys are really young for this one.
You slide the window up. You follow all instructions and you...
So, if you're a publisher, do you go to a web design company and say, hey, we just want to slide the chicken in and set it and forget it. We just need to do this redesign. And once we do it, everything's going to be perfect. Right? Set it, forget it, right? Come on, right? But, I mean, in working with some of these stations that we've worked with in the past, they are just maybe have just done a redesign, and then we're recommending them to maybe try this other thing. But whoa, no, we just did a redesign. We can't touch our website. Why? Where does that sit? So I think Amazon's going to say, oh no, we just did a redesign. We're not going to do anything different. I mean, Facebook never changes, right? They never do a redesign of Facebook, right? I mean, come on. Why does Facebook do what they do, right? I mean, you got to keep testing, otherwise you don't know, right? So anyway, that's you know, you definitely need to keep testing, right? Don't treat your website like cooking chicken, right? Maybe that should have been the headline for my stuff here. But we did some work with Palm Beach Post, and here's some things that we did for them. We did a digital audit or a digital analysis of a lot of stuff they did. So we looked at the design and site subsections and how they were designed, the user experience, right? That's the first thing we lead off with because a lot of times it's the most important, right? Remember, it's king, right? User experience. We looked at their paywall and subscription strategies. Look how many people were coming in and actually paying. We looked at their process of their flow of how they were trying to get people to conversion and get people to pay for their news. What news we thought people would be willing to pay for, right? We looked at all these different things here and gave them a full report back to them. This semester working with KSHB in Kansas City, we have not fully finished this out. We're just kind of started the beginning of the research and looking into their website and their digital products and how they're bringing people into the site, what they're doing with them on the site, and how they're trying to get people to come back. So we're working with them on this. The contact, and again, a lot of people that I've worked with in the past are Mizzou grads. So when you guys are out of here, if I'm still doing this stuff, maybe I'll come to you to see if we can work on your site. So I know last semester working the Palm Beach Post, Amy worked with one of the guys that we that was our client for that. So that was kind of interesting. But a couple things I want to leave you with is I don't want you guys to think that I'm in here telling you that every decision in your newsroom has to be data controlled. It's data informed, not data controlled. Okay, you can use data as best you can, but you don't want to stop covering City Hall because you have low traffic to that portion of your site, right? Still pretty important, right? So, but you might want to think about how you cover City Hall. How can we make it more engaging? What can we do? Can we get people to care more about Proposition 42 or whatever, right? So you can certainly think about how you cover something. Maybe you do an interesting take on it, right? Maybe you do a story on some tax increase, and maybe you have your story titled, "Everybody loves tax increases." You're like, what? You know, then they'll click on the site and be like, oh, maybe not everybody does, right? But you can kind of use some interesting headlines to get people into that, or some hooks, right? You don't want to go too crazy with it, because if you're a reputable news organization, you don't want to go too crazy with that. But certainly, a lot of places do that. Mashable, I mean, they're reputable, but they have good headlines, right? Lance Ulanoff comes and talks to our one of our capstones every semester, and he's the managing editor, I think, managing editor of Mashable. So he talks about a lot of these things. But anyway, data control, data informed, not data control. And so again, can you cover City Hall? What have you tried? What has worked? Are you keeping track? Right? What has failed? And again, keep track of what's failed. Because when you fail at something, you learned something, right? Don't do the same thing. Don't make that same failure twice, right? You don't need to know why did it fail or succeed. Or maybe you can test something to see why it's failed or succeeded. You can test headlines. Survey your people. So when you leave a website, if you leave the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, why not ask, hey, how was your experience? Would you be interested in taking this survey? Well, most people are saying no, but there will be some people who fill it out. Right? There's always people who fill out surveys. May as well ask and just be a pop under, right? So you're not intruding on people's experience. Again, one of the big things, don't go chasing page views. Chase user experience, because with a better user experience, you're gonna have people that are more engaged in your website. People are gonna read more stories. They're gonna be more interested in what you have to tell them. But it's all about the user experience, and did you meet their expectations in the long run? Okay, so you really need to chase user experience, not page views. Okay, and here's a few resources for you. The first one, the Analytics Academy at Google, gives you a really good start. If you're a beginner at analytics, this is a really good place to start. They start with the fundamentals program. You go through, answer a bunch of questions, and this actually leads to a certification that you can get through Google. I had my Interactive 2 class take the second and get certified with that. So it kind of tells you how analytics works, how it's measured, what some of those basic terms that I put up here a while back. It talks about those and what they mean, and they do a much better job of presenting it than I do. The second link here is for Avinash Kaushik. He's basically the godfather of analytics. The guy is brilliant and puts out a blog, updates it regularly. He's brilliant. I almost had him here for the Journalytics Summit last fall, but he told us it was $25,000 for him to show up in RJI. So we still have some pretty good speakers, but Avinash was not one of them. And if you need other resources, just Google it, right? You guys don't have to go to the library and look in the microfiche to see what happened, like I had to do when I had to go look something up, right? It took us forever. You guys have the internet, use it, right? There's a lot of good blogs out there, and I don't want to promote any one person over another other than Avinash. Actually, Manu brought in Chris Brogan into his class, and he's awesome at digital marketing and analytics and stuff. He's another good person to follow. And of course, I guess if you're up at Creek, you can contact me. You can email me or tweet at me or whatever, and I'll try to get back to you somewhat in a quick fashion. But hopefully, anyway, you guys got a little bit more knowledgeable about how analytics works, what it is, some things to look at, some things to consider. But really, the biggest thing is don't just set your website and forget it, just leave it. Say, we did a redesign. What else do we need to do? It doesn't work like that. It's not a hey, we redesigned our newspaper and now it's the way it's going to look for 10 years. It doesn't work like that. Test, 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 and when you test, there will be a loser, there will be a winner. Go with the winner, and that's how Amazon is making a lot of money. So why can't everybody, right? In fact, he made so much money that he bought the Washington Post. Right? Jeff Bezos? Yeah. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can do your own innovation. You can innovate on your own, right? Nobody has to tell you, hey, this might work. Test it, right? You don't have to send all your traffic to a test. Send just a small portion of it. That way you're not losing a bunch of money if something fails, right? You can still test it, right? So definitely keep that in mind. And I hope that all of you, when you guys get in the real world, kind of keep that in consideration. Always be willing to change. Know that your website has to change in order to get better, right? But if you don't change, you've fallen behind everybody else who is changing, right? So, a startup can come in, eat your lunch, put you out of business, right? You guys might be big news consumers. Do all you guys read the paper every day? Like a physical paper? Yeah? Okay. And this is the J school, right? So we should probably be, I read the paper more when I commuted in Chicago. I don't know. That was my newspaper time, but I have a 5-minute drive now, and the police frown upon me reading newspapers while I'm driving. So, typically, I'll get the news in the morning online, right? As you guys get older, and people like my grandparents die off, right? What happens, right? So it's changing, right? And we got to be prepared for it. And I just read something today where there was some economics law or something like that where a guy was talking about, digital journalism digital news isn't paying for journalism, right? Well, I tend to believe that I don't have the answer for how they're going to recoup print dollars. Maybe it'll probably never happen because they had such a monopoly on stuff. JCPenney could only go to one place if they were in St. Louis. They had to go to the Post-Dispatch, right? Now there's a lot of different places that they can go to, and they can go online to many, many different places, right? So they don't have a monopoly anymore. That monopoly's over, it's never coming back, right? But problems tend to work themselves out. If people crave to be informed, if they want to be informed, eventually news sites are going to charge more, and it's going to be worth it, right? Right now, I can tell you that news sites, the average income on a news site is high, right? Illiterate people tend not to read stuff online, right? But a lot of people who are really interested in news, and especially hard news, are fairly well off, right? Not everybody, but for the most part, right? So what does that mean to Mercedes or to Tiffany, right? Or to places that are advertisers like that? These people, as things kind of develop and go, I tend to think it's going to work itself out. I tend to think that news organizations will find a way to make more money. I don't know if the CPM model is going to continue forever. It may not, because I tend to think that news websites are undervalued, like in a big way. But one thing they haven't done a very good job of is segmenting their audience, right, for an advertiser. So I think eventually those things will change and it'll work itself out. But it's going to take somebody. It'll take somebody pretty smart to do it. Maybe it'll be one of you guys. I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I don't think journalism is dead. I don't think it's ever going to be dead. People, you know, the trade itself is very old, and it's morphed over time. You know, radio was going to kill print, and then TV was going to kill radio and print, right? Well, it didn't quite happen that way. Digital didn't kill everything. It didn't kill TV. It didn't, you know, it kind of did. You know, it more just wounded it, right? It wounded print. It didn't kill it, right? So we got to keep those things in mind. And you know, print may live on forever. We don't know. You know, as long as somebody craves to hold something in their hand and read it, it may live on forever, right? But my point with this is that most publishers are not getting the most revenue out of their digital products, and it's because they're not testing stuff. They're just set it and forget it, right? So in order to help offset some of the losses in print, let's optimize the revenue we can get from the newspaper. Let's optimize the experience that people get from it, thereby optimizing the revenue. Right? They work hand in hand. Don't go chasing revenue. Go chasing user experience. Revenue will fall. Okay? I'm done. Get you guys back.